Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Gayest Generation, where we hear LGBTQ older adults speak for themselves. Each episode, we sit down with a different member of the LGBTQ community who laid the foundation for the freedoms we have today. Now, their stories make noise where there is silence, and that silence has lived for far too long. In this episode, our 10th episode, we speak with theater director and educator Michael Walling. We discuss growing up in Portland during the 70s, being a New Yorker during the AIDS crisis, and the staying power of Tom Selleck's mustache. This is the Gayest Generation. Alrighty, how about you tell us who you are, tell us your age, and tell us how you identify.
Well, my name is Michael Walling. My pronouns are he, him. I'm gay. I'm 66 years old. I was born in Portland, Oregon, raised in a place called Happy Valley outside Portland. I now live in New York City. I've lived here almost 40 years, and I'm a stage director / art educator.
Yes, and that is actually how me and Michael know each other, is that when I was a spring chicken, when I was, a teen, I was in a number of his community theater productions. Right. Yes, and through the podcast, I was like, man, I should reach out to Michael and we should do something. I was thinking about it since our last conversation. I remember in Jesus Christ Superstar, in which you were the director, I have this wonderful memory of me being a very flippant young teen one day. I think it was tech rehearsal. And I was chewing gum on stage. I was popping my gum. I was marking it. I wasn't very much in the moment. And Mr. Michael Walling, you let me have it.
No. I like it.
Yeah, it really was one of the most wonderful formative experiences of being a young person. Because when I left that stage, I was like, oh gosh darn it. Next time I come back, I am going to set the stage on fire. I'm not going to chew no gum. I'm going to go full out.
Me, that was I believed in that production. I think the community embraced it. It was a good gig.
Oh, it was amazing. The feeling I had of being part of something amazing. And it was being a part of your productions was so incredible. Man, I was making art and you helped me make art. You know what I'm saying? It was so cool.
I love that.
But anyways, I didn't know that you were from Portland. My kind of image or understanding of Portland is very hippy dippy, coffee, West Coast. Was that the case when you were growing up in Portland, or?
Certainly. 60s, 70s. Yep. But I lived a little remotely. I lived in a valley that was up and over the hill. You can see the hill from the downtown Portland, but it was still away from the urban environment. But I went to school in downtown Portland in the 70s. So yeah, it was a beautiful place to be. Portland had done it right in terms of waiting to make decisions about mass transit until other cities had sort of figured it out. Their skyline grew up slowly because they were choosing the right, most interesting architects. And so it evolved into a really spectacular city. I mean, it's struggling today, certainly, but then quite different.
Sure. And I only know you as an adult. What kind of kid were you? What were you like growing up?
I think I was cautious. I was sensitive. I was quiet. I really didn't speak unless spoken to, and that lasted a long time.
Yeah.
Until I discovered theater, which was late in life in my high school. That sort of woke me up and gave me a home and a community, and yeah.
And can you remember maybe one of the first productions you were involved in, and in what capacity were you involved with it? And
Well, I didn't I kept my head down in high school. I was an average student. I got by, but I didn't particularly like school. I think my ultimate goal was just not to be seen. I found theater, or they found me. And that, I think our very first production I did was Fiddler on the Roof. I did Fiddler on the Roof. And it just sort of woke me up a bit to that I actually have a skill that people appreciate, and people are actually saying nice things to me, which was a new at that time of my life. And so it kind of, it woke me up.
Yep. And I can say I've had a similar experience with theater as well. Do you have any siblings? What was family life like? What was your parental situation like? Describe the Walling family unit.
I guess the word fractured comes to mind. My mother was married 4 times. She had 7 children. I was the oldest boy, and I never met my father. There were women matriarchs in my family, and they made sure that I would have no contact with my father. I never understood it as a kid. It was just a given. No one's ever going to talk about him. And that was from very young. I was super, super young. I would say first, second grade, maybe.
Sure.
And to this day, I've never met him. I knew he has since passed, but my brothers, there were 3 boys. She had 3 boys by this guy. And they later in life contacted him before he passed. And I think it was relatively rewarding to them. But at that point in my life, I just had lost the need to have that connection.
Sure.
And my mother was quite good at finding men to take care of her children, which I really appreciated much later in life. She had an addiction. She was an alcoholic. But these men that she gathered were good men, and they took on the family. And then she would eventually abandon them, as she did her children as well. It was very different because she was a mother so early on. I think she had her first kid at like 16. She really didn't have skill. She just didn't have it. And to cope with her lack of skill, she moved into drinking, and the men basically raised these children. I was raised by these stepfathers. And so one by one, they all had to get out. And remember, it was my turn to get out. And then I never looked back. And unfortunately, when you get out so young, you lose the connection with your siblings. I didn't get a chance to be a big brother. I didn't, it just came my turn to actually get out. So fractured is a good word. And unfortunately, that particular family, that biological family, is spread all over the country, which I have really no connection with. And, I think that's sad. As you get older, you wonder about them all, but they're out there somewhere. And the good thing about me getting out so early was that I stayed relatively clean and sober in my life, where most of them just only knew what they knew. And that
absolutely
legacy of addiction just became chronic, and they passed it on to their children, and it just got, so it's a complex childhood, but it took me a while to sort of understand it. Probably not until my 40s did I really sort of grasp of what actually happened in my childhood. And then it took a lifetime to forgive. I had a lot to forgive. And fortunately, I think I was successful at it. So, yeah.
Oh, that's incredible to hear. And I think that journey of forgiveness, so many of us are on, and so many LGBTQ people, that is a journey that is necessary for survival, really. And during this, as you described it, during this fractured part of your, am I going to say maturation? That seems like a,
right.
I don't know, it seems like a sciencey word, but as you're growing up in this fractured environment, what are you doing with your gayness? And I love this question too. When is the first time you realized, whoa, hold up, there's something going on? Can you describe that moment?
Yes. I knew I was very different. I knew I was, I said before, very sensitive. So I would, as a child, by default, you absorb information. You're unaware of it. As a child in my universe, I was searching for information. I was grasping it, holding on to it. I learned sort of an interview style of how to get information from people. And I think when you grow up in that kind of dysfunctional situation, that's your coping method.
Sure.
So I was very curious as a young kid about my sister's boyfriends. How old are they? Where did they come from? And I wanted to spend time with them. If they were in the room, I was in the room. I didn't understand, but I knew it was odd. It was an odd. The time that it's very vivid in my brain about something's really off for me was my sister and her boyfriend decided to wash their car, and in the 70s, this very hairy, burly guy was out washing his car with his shirt off, and I was just frozen. I was sitting on the porch and I could not stop watching. And it really was then that I went inward and went, what was that? And I was probably in junior high. I might have been 14, 13, somewhere in there. And I think that was the first time that I went, oh yes. And even then, I didn't know what it was. Didn't know.
Yes. My next question is going to be, that's what was happening internally. What were you hearing about being gay externally? What did you know about that experience? What were the people around you saying in the world of Portland? What information were you receiving externally about what it means to be gay?
I would say because we were so remote and isolated, and there was one school and nothing. There was no icons on television. It just was nothing. It was all this internal thing happening in me that I didn't quite have information. I just didn't get it. It wasn't until I perhaps merged into high school that there was some negative connotation to same-sex thing that I realized that, and I think by the end of junior high school, I was opening up a little bit. And not in terms of my sexuality, just my personality. And that negative thing that happened in high school, I went inward again. I really worked hard at not being seen. And unfortunately, that was sort of the message that you got from your peers. And even in theater, finding my own community, my own group, there was no reference. There was no one there. So it wasn't until I actually left for college.
Mm-hmm. And I can say this is true about my experience a little bit, is when I decided to turn inward and to seek out a quietness, to not be seen per se. In that place within me, I found a certain sense of creativity.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I wasn't exactly eager to talk about all this, that, and the other, but this inner world that I could have, where I could be creative, was such a solace for me. Is that something that you relate to, or?
Well, once I got out into the community, once I went to college, which was in Portland, the community was available to me, and I sort of sought it out, and I went through the channel of theater. There were lots of creatives in theater, and that really, I just sort of found who I was. I found my voice. I met other older gay men who had partners, and that was out of the realm of reality, that you actually have a boyfriend for a long time. So that was all new to me. And I was, I was 19. There were a couple of gay bars within my community, but that's when I started exploring and being out and about. But yes, the creative community helped me find who I am who I eventually became.
Mm-hmm. And after your time at college in Portland, where did you find yourself next? What was the next move?
Well, I did a master's program in Portland as well. I went to Reed College and I got a bachelor's of science in psychology. And then I went on to Portland State University and got a master's of science in sociology, which of course had nothing to do with theater, correct? So, and I didn't really attach myself to my college colleagues. I didn't really have friends in college. Right out of high school, I got jobs. I put myself through colleges, and I started studying theater outside of the context of the university. Mm-hmm. And everything that I started learning about myself, about falling in love, and what the world thought of gay people at that time, came from being out in the world, never from my college.
Something that you had said reminded me, in Washtenaw County here in the year 2021, in which we have two, University of Michigan, Eastern Michigan University, a lot of professionals who live here, we have absolutely not a single gay bar. Not the one. It is the biggest head scratcher. Having those spaces during that time, did you find those spaces to be important to you? And what was the scene like? I ask everyone I speak to about the scene, because we don't really have a scene anymore. We have a collection of applications on our telephone.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And it's like, tell us about the scene.
Well, it was very community driven. That's for sure. It was, it wasn't hidden. It was, they had a circle of bars. There was maybe 3 bars, one of them which was a drag bar. And it was, I'll tell you what it was then that it is not now. It's sort of cross-generational. There was a time where I could go into a bar and sit next to a guy who'd been in that bar for years and years and years. And pretty much every young gay man knew older gay men, and they bonded friends with them. We learned a lot. There was so much wisdom there, and that does not happen today. And I loved that about the community, that it was so diverse, and it was a loud community. They were very proud, and the theaters that I was involved in, there was lots of gay people in the theater. So it was sort of an idyllic time in my growing up and learning about my sexuality. And, I had a heartbreak and all the things you're supposed to have when you're young. But it was a beautiful place. I can't say that today. I know very little about the Portland scene today. But even as I was leaving, the city was sort of collapsing a little bit. It's because when AIDS sort of rolled in, and the community was suffering, and
Something else I wanted to talk a little bit more about is a big part of this podcast, why it exists, is because I feel as though that being able to hear from the older LGBTQ generation is something that can only help people in my generation and younger. And it feels like such an untapped resource, and it feels disrespectful. Like, I think about like when I go to a gay bar maybe, and it is just young gay people, pretty much just young gay men. Yeah. And you might see a gentleman of an older age somewhere, and that person is definitely not in the fold of what's happening in the club or in the bar at that time. And it seems ridiculous. It seems foolish. So yeah, this is just my roundabout long way to say thank you for being here and talking with us today. You had mentioned that around that time in your life, that's when AIDS started affecting the community. I can, or rather, I cannot imagine what it would be like to be like. How did you react when you first heard about what AIDS was? How does one react to that?
Well, it was also new. No one really Act. No one really knew what it was. My community was hit super hard. Pretty much any director that I'd worked with as a young actor, they all got AIDS. And so it was a devastating time. The theater community pretty much folded up, and the city sort of turned against the community, and it became a really outwardly overt anti-gay city. Everybody was so fearful. It was all fear driven. And, it wasn't the reason I left, but it certainly was one of the reasons that I left. It was a very, very, very sad time. And it literally wiped the face off of the creative community. All those beautiful artists that were super young, 20s, 30s, all passed. And the city had to sort of reinvent himself, the creative side of the city.
It is so hard to put into perspective. I was speaking with somebody about it a few months ago, and I was challenged to imagine what it would be like if 90% of your friends just died. Mm-hmm. And that is an unthinkable reality. And I think that is the experience that was the experience for so many people. And it's something that I hope that we don't forget.
Right. Yeah. Well, I moved to New York City, which was the epicenter of it. And so then it was in my face, and it was it was a part of my life. It was a part of my daily life. All my friends, and there were friends that had moved from Portland as well. They were passing. All the new acquaintances that I would get within the community, they were all passing. So it was a very, very difficult, challenging time for sure.
And while you were in New York during that time, did you experience any of like the ACT UP protests, or did you witness any of kind of this pushback from the Gay Liberation Front? I was a part of those. I won't call them protests, but sort of trying to get the world aware. That was an exciting time because the community was coming back and fighting for rights, and it was a twofold. You were grieving the loss of your family, and you were fighting for the future, really. So I took many a bus down to DC with friends. I helped open up the quilt on the lawns of the White House. Oh, wow.
So it was a beautiful time in my life, but it was also a very sad time. I was grieving all the time. I think to this day, I'm still grieving for it because I lost so many good friends. So,
and during this time, what was happening in the theater scene? What was happening culturally? Did the AIDS epidemic influence or inform the art you were a part of during that time?
Well, sure, it certainly did. It certainly affected the mainstream commercial theater, which was Broadway at the time. Many stars were passing, and regionally, it was hard to cast. There was a stigma attached to it. A lot of gay men had to go into the closet in order to continue on to their careers. There were a lot of people had to just leave the business.
Yeah.
I shifted to directing early in my career, and that was helpful to sustain my livelihood in theater. But it was not easy for young gay actors, for sure.
And can you tell us a little bit more about what does a director do?
Well, the director is multitasking. They have to start off with a vision, and then your job is to convince all these other creative artists to follow that vision.
Yeah.
Whether designers, set designers, scenic, painters, costumers, you got to get them all on the same page and enthusiastic about the project that you want to create, and then you cast the show. Sure. It's a big job, but it's one that I started early on and was not good at all. And
what do you mean by that? Like, what parts of it were you not good at? Or
I was not good at collaborating, delegating, and communicating.
All right.
Because, an actor is a relatively, it's a bit of a robot. Do this, do it like this. And I want you to do that over and over and over again. As a young artist, I would see a director pick out everything from the color of the shoelaces to the color of the gels, and they would have the language that other artists understood. So it was really, I realized that is a really hard gig, because you have to know their universe well enough that they understand how to get you the vision you're looking for. And I embraced that. It was a chore. So ultimately, that's what a director is.
And how I know you is because I think, and please tell me if I got it wrong, when I met you, you had a circuit, if you will, of different community theaters across the country that you would come to and direct shows for.
Right. Well, actually, that was the only community theater I've ever directed shows for.
No way.
I've only had a regional professional career. Yeah. I loved that theater company, Pit and Balcony in Michigan. I loved it.
Shout out Pit and Balcony. Shout out.
I loved it so much that I just wanted to be among the people.
Yeah.
So going back and kept going back. At that time, I had some long-standing gigs at universities. I taught at a few universities, and then I was beginning a school in Minnesota, which I still have today, a performing arts school that I'm artistic director of. But that community theater to me was very special, and we created extremely unique art that the community had not seen before, the quality of which, we found some beautiful artists in the community to create great art. And so, yeah, it was a good experience.
How did you find out about Little Saginaw, Michigan?
It was a referral. A friend of mine was going to do this project in Michigan and couldn't do it, and asked if I had any interest, and just to fill in the blanks for him. And I did, and they took me. And my first show there, I believe, was Music Man. And I loved it so much. Just to have the diversity of the community walk through the door was just a delight. And I knew I could step it up. I really wanted to step up the quality which they create and give back to the community, these beautiful artists. And so, yes.
Oh my gosh, I cannot tell you how cool I felt. I'm wearing all black. I'm wearing a little smudged eyeliner, stomping my ass across that stage. Oof.
That's right.
Yeah. Now, you had mentioned this school that you had started in Minnesota.
It had actually been going for about a decade before I got there.
Uh-huh. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I arrived as a guest director. And it was a large school at the time, a few thousand students. And but I saw a lot of the organizational aspects of it, could have been improved. So I started suggesting to the founders, perhaps if you try this, and I got more involved administratively than I ever thought I was. I was really there just to direct a show.
Sure.
And eventually, through many years of going back, I slowly started taking over the leadership, the artistic leadership of the school. And now I just hit my 30-year mark.
Oh, incredible. I think it is no coincidence that I've spoken with many gay educators. Mm-hmm. Me, myself, and, a few years ago was educating the youth gaily, if you will.
Yeah.
Can you talk about your experience being an LGBTQ educator?
Yeah, well, it's been awesome. My school has a dramatic evolution. I started in the 90s when you weren't allowed to have same-sex PDA. And many a founder came to me and said, you got to pull that over. And I'm like, I am the wrong person for you to ask me to do that. Yeah. Comfortable, and we are the campus that allows them to be their authentic self, and I'm not going to change that. And I got a lot of pushback from that, but eventually, to their credit, the original founders just said, it is what it is. Let's let them be themselves. And then it shifted over leadership from executive director leadership, and they were open arms and said, let's just let them be. Yeah. And it was such a beautiful thing to watch that happen on our campus. And now it is multi-cultural, cultural. You get to be whoever you want to be for that brief moment of time you're at the school.
And how powerful is that for when you're a young person, you know?
But it really, it gives them the strength to go back into their school year and be proud of who they are. And, you know, it's also an evolutionary time for them discovering who they are. You know, one summer they're this and the next summer they're that, and you just go with it. And it's a beautiful thing.
I think one of my favorite parts of being a teacher was seeing my students try on so many different identities. I think that's the best word for it. Is
a long time, perhaps it was my age, to sort of master the pronouns.
Yes.
And trying to be terribly respectful to them and not wanting to throw anybody off. And it was hard. It still is to this day challenging for our guest artist teachers. And, you know, I am proud to sort of be a part of that education for them.
Yep. And I think especially when it comes to kids, well, first of all, let me say, at least with the educators that I've spoken with, and this is true to my experience as well, is I never received pushback from students about me being a large flaming homosexual. You know what I'm saying? The kids, even like the jocks would be like, "Oh, yeah, you are, aren't you?" And then it never affected anything. That pushback always came from administration.
Which full circles back to parents, which comes back to funding. I mean, it all goes back.
Absolutely.
But to the credit of the Fargo Public School System, who I work for, good on them that they are just, it is the world. They live in 2022. They know it. They know the world is changing and they want to change with it. And they give me and my students and my colleagues permission. And just be who you are. That's who we want to be here, is you. So it's quite good.
What would be something from your professional career that you can point out as something that maybe you're the most proud of? A particular production or a particular instance, an interaction? What's something where you can go, oh, that's when I was really doing it?
I think, well, certainly it is today. That evolution of who I am today as an older gay male creative. It's taken me a long time to get here, and super proud to be here. But I think it's probably arts education. You know, I've directed professionals all over the country, but once I landed in a part of the world who wasn't familiar with older gay men, and acceptance was there internally, at least within our bubble. And watching these artists become not only authentic to who they are, but to their art, and then going out in the world and expressing it. And then to hear years later how the achievements, a lot of them are here in New York City working. I'm super proud of that. And I have never hidden who I was. And hopefully that was a reflection for them as well.
Yeah.
You know.
And this is something that I should have asked earlier. As queer people, we have all sorts of coming outs. You know, sometimes this coming out occurs, you know, at the corner store. Sometimes from that conversation with your parents to, you know, a smaller conversation with somebody that you've run into on the street, and it just so happens to be brought up. Do you have any, what are the most significant coming outs that you've had in your life, and what did you learn from them?
Well, I certainly came from a generation that no one really came out. It wasn't part of it. But I am also today one of those junkies who will watch many coming out stories on YouTube. Yeah. I love the coming out stories. It makes me so happy. And I think it's because I didn't get that opportunity. It just never happened. No one ever asked. No one in my family, no friends, no relatives. No one wanted to open that to them, which was a Pandora box.
Yes.
And today it's the most beautiful thing ever. And I don't care how loud and how proud you are. I'm still into it, no matter how you choose to come out. Or to be honest, if you never do.
Yes.
It's your thing. It's up to you. It's your time. I know there's a lot of disturbance from some people's court of why aren't they coming out? And to each his own, I say.
Yes.
And I celebrate it with them. So yeah, unfortunately, I didn't really have those moments. They're more internally, when you realize that when you're with somebody, oh, I guess I am this person.
Yep.
And they were announcing it to someone else. Yeah.
In my experience, as an adult, my sister has said to me, I'm sorry we never gave you an opportunity to come out. Because really how it happened was my mom just walked into the room and she was like, "Are you gay?" And I was like, "Yeah."
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, "Yeah, I am." And
even then, as a young man, I'd always felt that once I figured out that I was gay, I always felt that it was sort of a speck on the map of who I was. It was just,
yes.
I was so much more than that. And in the end, the being gay became super important to me, and it snowballed into, no, it's not a speck. It is who I am. It is the whole me.
Yeah.
It's not a little fraction. I am this from my toes to the top. And that is okay.
Broadway took a big hit because of AIDS. And I really refrain from comparing AIDS to anything, because that's just, I think it's a pretty meaningless thing to do. But I know that in 2021 and 2022, Broadway has also been hit because of the COVID. I sound like my grandpa. Because of the COVID. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on Broadway now, and from a theater director's perspective? Yeah, give us the tea, if you will.
Sure. Well, I will say this: it's similar in terms of how Broadway responds to a crisis. Broadway, during the time of AIDS, created Broadway Cares, and that's when every show gave a percentage towards the funding and education of AIDS, and that continues to this day. And I think similar with COVID now, they're trying to help the city. It's very localized now. Now it's help the people in our community, find better resources for this. And unfortunately, Broadway has opened and closed and opened and closed. I recently went to see a musical and I got stopped at the front door and said, "This is not happening." I think technicians got COVID, which passed through the cast. And so it is in crisis, but they're also in fundraising mode for sure. There are artists, you could reach the pinnacle of your career on Broadway and still be waitering the next day because it's such a temporary gig. So a lot of these artists struggle with insurance. And so there are a multitude of organizations now within the Broadway community that are helping support them financially and helping them get better faster and find resources when they lose their apartments. And so you can be at the pinnacle of your career on Broadway, and no one knows you in this country. It's not like film where you're international. These are artists who have been working there, and a very large, massive gay community who've been working at the height of their careers for many, many years, who are now super struggling, and not only in their health, but their financial situation. So Broadway has really gathered amazing resources to take care of their own.
Wow, that's powerful. Is there anything about living in New York City during this time, during pandemic isn't the right word for both of them, but is there something interesting about being a New Yorker during this time, and especially as somebody who also was a New Yorker during the AIDS crisis?
Well, I will say during the AIDS crisis, one of the things that was the most difficult to struggle with is that life just continues on.
Oh my gosh.
How loud you get and how passionate you are, people just keep going. And that is quite the opposite when COVID hit. And to be honest, to walk the streets of New York City during this time, it was kind of a beautiful experience because the city had emptied, and it was quiet and isolating, but it also beautiful at the same time. There was a crisis in the city, but the city was sort of wrapped in this warm blanket of support. So many other states around the country, and through our own state and federal funding, helped support New York City. It was the epicenter of the virus in the beginning. My neighbors pulled together relatively quickly. I, of course, was out of work, so I started volunteering for food distributing, and I did that for almost a full year, just unloading boxes and filling dinner bags and serving dinner. And so though the city got quieter, the community got stronger. And a lot of my neighbors, because of this situation, and it's rising again. Broadway's falling again, and the city will be strong again.
Absolutely. Is there something that you can think of that you would like to remind people of my generation, that you would like us to know? Is there one thing that perhaps isn't the most obvious looking back on the AIDS epidemic that you think it's important for us to know today or to recognize today?
Well, not to be cliche, but you are all standing on the shoulders of someone. And I felt that when I was young as well. And because the community now is so fractured, even in New York City, the bars have gone away. And that wasn't because of COVID. Just the dynamics of the city has changed so much. There was a time where the community was all isolated on Christopher Street, and you knew everyone, and you could easily flow in and out of gay establishments, from retail to liquor license places. And it was a very joyous, tight community. And it's now sort of spread out over the city, and the bars are relatively young. They're all pretty much geared towards 20-somethings. And so you lose that whole generation of older gay men and women who really have been here the entire time. Yep. So idea of, and there are many websites that are sort of gearing towards this, of allowing young people to reach out to this older generation, and and they're enterprising, such as what you're doing here today. So I think that's a beautiful thing, and I think you're a great example of that. And let's keep moving forward with that for sure.
Ooh, well, thank you for your kind words. And I'm right there with you. Yeah. Let me ask you this. Mm-hmm. What's next in the world of Michael Walling? What's on the agenda? What's on the docket?
Well, I'll continue to, I'm 66 now, so I'll continue to work at my school until someone says, and you're done. I love working at this school. So, but I hope I'll get to a quieter life. I live in one of the biggest cities in the world. I've lived here for most of my adult life. It's loud, and I'd like to go to a quieter place. And have the accessibility to find a great art, and not be so isolating. But I think that's my next step, is probably leave the city but keep connected as an artist.
Very exciting. Okay, what I'd like to move into now is everyone I've interviewed so far, I thought it'd be fun if we asked the same set of kind of quick questions. Now, some of these questions, the answer can't be too quick, and that's fine, But I'm eager to hear some of your answers to some of these questions. So let's see here. What would you say is the biggest difference between younger and older LGBTQ folks?
I think it's just wisdom, and wisdom on the planet longer. And I'll be curious to know if, when I was a young gay man, did I think I knew it all and understood the community? And I'm not convinced I did, but it feels at times that this younger generation doesn't quite invest in how they actually got to be have an opportunity to get married, and they're just not quite aware of what it took to get there. So, yeah.
I wake up every day and I say to myself, girl, you know nothing. And not in like a mean way, but in there's so much that I have yet to experience and to learn and to understand. Girl, I know nothing. What do you feel about younger people using the word queer?
I embrace it. I don't, it doesn't have a negative connotation to me at all. I always smile when someone introduces themselves that way. There are very specific reasons why young gay people want to be called queer, and to each their own identity of why that is. So if this is what you want, I'm super happy for you.
Did you have an icon growing up? Something that you saw on TV and you went, ooh, I want to be them.
Well, if icon flipped into a attraction, probably, because I was such a late bloomer, it might have been Tom Selleck, Magnum PI.
Oh.
Or maybe even Tom Jones, which sure you don't recall even who that is.
Oh, I know. What's New Pussycat?
There you go. Wasn't any, I think when young people think of that, they think of singers but there wasn't, I didn't know who Harvey Milk was.
Yeah.
Young. And I'm sorry to say that it took me a long time to figure that out. And now he would be that iconic gay male figure for me.
Yeah. And that Tom Selleck mustache, oof, never going out of style. Everybody has the Tom Selleck mustache. Jeez Louise. Yeah. What stereotypes about LGBTQ folks bother you the most?
Well, they're so narrowly defined, and not realizing that it is such an eclectic community and so diverse. And, I certainly get a lot of that because I work in the Midwest a lot.
Yeah.
It's quite fun to help somebody to sort of open up their eyes to the diversity of the community. And it makes them embrace it just a little easier because they have this typical idea of what a gay person is. And it's just so doesn't really exist anymore. And yeah.
Betty Davis or Joan Crawford?
Betty Davis.
Yeah, easy. Have you ever used a dating site or application?
Always.
Yeah, and especially because you're in a big city too.
Yeah, sure.
Who was? Oh, I think we know it's Tom Selleck, your first celebrity crush.
Mm-hmm.
Who was your best Halloween costume?
Well, here's a little insight. I've never done a Halloween costume ever in my entire life.
Oh my gosh!
Started with not being seen. Don't be doing something where people will be looking at you. Into never having a. Listen, I'm still a young buck. I can do a Halloween costume.
I was going to say, this year you're throwing on a wig and some glitter and you're going to make something happen. What makes you happy?
I think art makes me super happy. Art of any kind, performance art of any kind, museums, creatives, surrounding yourself with people who love beauty and, they're always expressing art. And yeah, that makes me very joyful.
What gives you hope?
Well, certainly within my own community, there are iconic figures for me that run particular groups within the city that move our community forward, that I can sit in those meetings and go to those book signings of people telling their story about being gay. And that I find all of that very, very hopeful. And listen, if you just watch television long enough, you will be astounded of how many commercials are geared towards gay people.
Yeah.
And that catches my breath coming from where I came from, that it is so there and clearly so much further to go, but it has moved forward so much. And I get in a roundtable with the elders and we talk about what a beautiful time in our life that we got to see this, and can't even imagine what it's going to be like once we're gone. mean, I hope it just keeps growing and growing into a beautiful direction.
You get to have dinner with 3 people, alive or dead. Who are they?
Ooh. Alive or dead? That is a challenging. It would probably be my father. Probably one of my closest friends who's been with me for 40 years. And I would say, and if I think of somebody iconic, how about Barack Obama?
Ooh, nice. Okay.
A once in a lifetime moment.
What's your favorite fast food?
I love me a good tater tot. Tater tots, that's my current infatuation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, taco of some sort.
Thoughts and feelings on Taco Bell?
I'm a Taco Bell guy.
Yeah.
I'll take Mountain Dew.
Oh my gosh. For people who say they don't like Taco Bell, have you no taste buds? Go get a Baja Blast now. What would you bring to a potluck dinner?
I would probably bring a salad of some sort, something fresh and green, most likely.
Are you a cook? Are you a home cook? Are you a baker?
I cook for myself at least 4 times a week. I don't fall into any category of chefhood, but I definitely will bake. I'll bake for myself. I'll bake brownies and cupcakes and cakes, but it's for me. You know, so I get a little fearful if I have to share my food.
Indeed. Now, you've been very kind in letting me ask you any which question. If you could ask me any question, what would it be?
Well, I'm sort of, I love this concept that you've created here. And I'm curious if there's a next stage that you've already thought about. If once this has reached its level of success, where would be the next place for me to go with this? Have you?
Yes, especially coming into 2022, I've thought about what would I like for this project. Mm-hmm. And I think it's 2 things. The first thing is just more episodes. Since the pandemic, we've been able to churn out 9 episodes, and that's wonderful. I'd really like to kick it into gear. I'd really like to, even if we could get 2 episodes out a month, that's one part of it. The second part of it, and I think an important goal for 2022 and this podcast is that we need to be committed to speaking with a diverse cast of people. I think it's important that we highlight all different experiences from different races, different people, or different identities within the LGBTQ spectrum, people with varying genders. I'd love to speak with a non-binary older adult. I'd love to speak with a trans man older adult. Locating, what's the best verb? Ensuring that this podcast is something that represents all walks of life is very important to me. Also, something from the beginning of the podcast is I have interviewed people, and what's the right way to say this? I've interviewed former mayors of major metropolitan cities. I've spoken with people who are state legislators. I've also spoken to people who live in Vassar, Michigan. People who are from small towns. Lives that would have otherwise went unseen or unheard. So I'm committed to somehow tapping back into that, because as wonderful and as thankful as it is, as I am to have spoken with people with very public lives, I think that the podcast wouldn't be complete if we didn't talk to people who don't have that sort of public life.
Sure. Yeah.
Or already have a podium or a megaphone, metaphorically. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So those 3 things is kind of where I see the podcast going next. The idea of releasing like a video podcast, if you will, because I think it would be really interesting for viewers and listeners to see the people we're talking to. Is an exciting idea as well.
Yeah.
So yes,
this idea, and I have no doubt that you will achieve the next level for sure.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. We're all really excited about this, and yeah. But yes, it is unfortunate that even after 9 episodes, I'm still terrible at this. And I'm terrible at this in my life too. I can't say goodbye. I just cannot. So what I end up doing is I just end up rambling for a long time. So let's do that. Thank you so much. Thank you so freaking much.
Yeah.
We're so thankful that you shared with us today and that you feel comfortable doing so. And we're all better for it. So thank you.
I appreciate that. Adore you, adore this concept, and all power to you. Move to the future.
Move to the future.
If you or somebody you know would like to be a guest on The Gayest Generation, email us at thegayestgeneration@aadl.org.